Well, good morning, everybody. It's been a while since Nana or Papa have read you stories. So I'm going to read you a story this morning. It's called The Sleeping Beauty. Now, I don't know how long this is going to take, so I'm going to keep track of the clock, and if it goes 15 minutes, then I have to stop and do a second part. But it's good to see your faces. It was good to see you on Skype, and you guys all look like you're growing up big and healthy and strong. And we love you. We can't wait to see you guys this summer. Sooner than that, probably. Probably sooner than that. So anyway, it's called The Sleeping Beauty. And it's by Mercer Mayer. Now, Mercer Mayer didn't write the first Sleeping Beauty, but this is his idea of Sleeping Beauty. And he wrote it for Mary Ann. Somewhere in time in a faraway land there lived a great king in a large castle with many courtiers and servants. Nevertheless, the king was lonely. One day he came upon a stable girl who tended the royal horses. So deeply impressed was he by her gentleness, sincerity, and beauty that he fell in love with her and asked her to become his queen. Living in that kingdom were 12 fairies with great power, so in order to show them respect, the king invited them to the wedding feast. Of course, all the noble lords and ladies of the kingdom were invited as well. For days the castle chefs worked at baking and roasting, preparing a great big banquet table. Tables were set up with fine dishes in silver, and at the special table for the fairies, 12 golden goblets, which are cups, which the king prized most highly. What the king did not know was that the previous year, the manager of his household staff had fallen deeply in debt and had sold one of the golden goblets, replacing it with gold-painted lead. For the manager reasoned, the king is so wealthy, and I have served him so many years. How could he mind if he really knew my plight? On the day of the wedding feast, all the lords and ladies and fairies arrived, taking their places at the appointed tables. Each guest in turn proposed a toast. The nobles with silver goblets, the fairies with the gold, and finally the time came for the blue fairy to make her toast. As she rose from her place, it was clear to everyone that she was very angry. As fate would have it, she was the one served with the gold-painted lead. She raised the goblet high in the air and said, "My toast to you and your bride is this: never shall children you bear, for this insult will not repair." The star fairy, who had not yet spoken, rose and said, "Good king and queen, I cannot undo a curse, but I can modify one. Never shall your children bear until the silver owl appear." And one by one the fairies rose and they departed. So she was one mad fairy, wasn't she? Can you see where her hand is changing color? That's what happens when it's not real gold. The king tried to comfort his bride, but to no avail, and finally at daybreak he decided he must find the silver owl himself. Bidding the queen farewell, he set off on horseback. The days turned into weeks as the king searched far and wide for the silver owl. One night before his return, as the queen waited, a silver owl flew into her chamber. In her desire to have a child, she overcame her fear of the strange bird. She fed and cared for it and allowed no one to harm it. Finally, the king returned, and the queen, delighted, showed him the silver owl, and soon after that, she had a baby. As they awaited for the baby, or she got pregnant. As they awaited the birth, the queen continued to care for the owl, showing it great tenderness. Time passed, and the king began to grow more and more jealous of this attention she paid to the bird. Although he knew the owl must be enchanted, his jealousy overcame him, and he had the bird killed. He presented the feathers to the queen. The queen was horrified. "How could you do such a thing?" she cried. "Our happiness began the day the silver owl appeared." Not wishing to admit to his rage and jealousy, the king replied, "I thought it might escape. In this way you would always have its beautiful feathers." See the owl in the tree back here? Yeah. Soon a baby girl was born to them, and the queen took the feathers of the silver owl and made a cover for her. The curse of the blue fairy remained in her mind, and she hoped the feathers from the enchanted bird would protect the child. The king remained jealous and angry, but he kept it in his heart. Nevertheless, it consumed him, as though he still lived under the blue fairy's curse. And when the time came for his daughter's christening, he neglected to invite her, thus offending her a second time. A procession of lords and ladies arrived for the ceremony, each bearing a gift for the child. Each fairy bought a gift as well. From the red fairy came the gift of beauty. From the orange fairy came the gift of charm. The yellow fairy gave the gift of grace, and the green fairy gave the gift of wisdom. As the ceremony continued, the door suddenly flew open and a great gust of wind came into the hall. "And I give you the gift of death," said the blue fairy as she appeared in the doorway. "O feeble mortal king, not only have you insulted me by not inviting me here today, but you deeply wounded me by killing the silver owl. He was my brother. He had taken pity on you and your wife." As though a veil had been lifted from his eyes, the king saw his mistake and fell to his knees. "Blue fairy, have pity now for the sake of this child." "I will show this child the same pity you have shown me and mine," said the blue fairy. "When your child has grown into all the gifts my sisters have given, she'll prick herself on a spindle and die." With that, the blue fairy vanished like a cloud of ice-cold vapor. The queen began to weep softly as the star fairy, who had not yet given her gift, stepped forward. "Your daughter shall not die," she said, "but she'll fall asleep until someone who loves her more than life itself shall find her and kiss her on her lips, and then she will wake up." So the last fairy saved her again, didn't she? Immediately, the king gave orders that all spindles in the kingdom be destroyed. A spindle is where they used to spin yarn to make fabric to make clothes. Okay, that's what a spindle is, and it's got a sharp top on it. The years passed, and the child grew in all the gifts the fairy had given her, and when she reached the age of 17, the king arranged a festive birthday celebration for her. After a day of feasting and games, the princess grew weary and slipped away. Soon she came to a part of the castle where she'd never been before. Curious, she made her way across an empty courtyard to an old tower. She climbed the winding stairs inside and found a small door at the top, and it was slightly opened. She opened it and entered a little stone room. There sat the blue fairy spinning. "Oh, let me try," said the princess. Since she'd never before seen a spindle, she felt no fear. She took the spindle eagerly, and no sooner had she touched it than it picked her finger, and she fell into the floor, and she was unconscious. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't conscious anymore. She was kind of like sleeping, but she couldn't be woken up. Then the king realized his daughter was missing. He ordered a search of the castle, and they found her in the old tower. They carried her to the great hall and placed her on a small couch, and then the king sent for the star fairy. So there she is. And do you see the blue fairy back here? Yep. So far, everything's happening the way they said. Wonder what's going to happen. She arrived on the first morning star. All of the things that were foretold at her christening had come to pass. If one who loves her more than life itself shall find her, then she will awaken. If not, then she'll sleep until the end of time. Then I will order someone to love her, said the king in his grief. No, said the star fairy, that's not the way. But you can help. Only tell us what we can do, said the queen. I'll place a deep enchantment here, said the star fairy, and all within the castle gates shall sleep too, so that if she wakes in a different time, she'll have those she loves with her. Otherwise, if she wakes alone for many years from now, then all of you are dead, her heart will break. But understand, if no one finds her, then neither she nor any of you will ever awake again. Then the star fairy cast her spell and left. She told them that the deep enchantment would come when they least expected it, for that was the only way that it would work. A year passed, and still they waited, and the princess slept on. The king and queen were very sad for their daughter. When they looked at her, it seemed like she would awake at any moment. There they are. They're very sad. Yeah. One day at noon, the air around the castle grew really heavy and still as never before, and everyone stopped and wondered at it for one brief moment, and then they fell asleep. The cook fell asleep atop the scullery boy's ears, boxing the scullery boy's ears. He was chewing him out. The king and queen fell asleep in the throne room. The horses fell asleep in the stables, and the dogs in the yard. Even a little mouse that crawled out to steal a piece of cheese was surprised by the cat. They fell asleep together, curled up on the floor. The fire in the hearth slept. Not a breath of wind blew, nor a blade of grass stirred, nor a cricket chirped. Not a bird sang. Everything was very, very still. But they were all asleep, weren't they? She came through and put them all to sleep. Around the castle grew a great thorn hedge. It grew wide and thick and tall, part of the Star Fairy's enchantment to protect them as they slept. It grew so quickly that within an hour it covered the entire castle, and within a day it was high as a mountain. Circling the mountain of thorns formed a deep, dark, murky swamp full of quicksand and all kinds of crazy things. And at the edge of the swamp, a griffin stood guard, keeping everyone away. Only one who loved the princess from all eternity, without thought for his own life, would ever dare to make his way to this horrible place. And so it had to be, to break the Blue Fairy's curse. The Star Fairy placed a dwarf at the road leading to the swamp, the mountain of thorns, to warn travelers and to test the resolve of anyone who dared to go further. The castle was rich, and some would come to take things that didn't belong to them. There would be those who were simply foolish. But there would be only one who would feel something deep within his soul, called to that within Sleeping Beauty. So she put all kinds of thorns around the castle, didn't she? Yep, it's going to take somebody really special to climb over the top of those thorns. 10 years passed, and then 20, and the Blue Fairy left the kingdom and went to another one far away. 80 years came and went. The Blue Fairy enchanted a king. She married him and bore him a son. The boy grew to be a man, and then 100 years had passed. He was 20 years old. He had known the story of Sleeping Beauty all of his life, and he knew he was destined to search for her. The prince told his father that he meant to find Sleeping Beauty, but his father told him he couldn't go. So one moonlit night he slipped away. As he was passing the outer gate, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was his father, who said to him, "As you are a man with your own heart and mind, I know that I cannot hold you. Take this sword, for it is all I can give that might save your life." They embraced, and the young man set off. The prince traveled many miles through many lands. In each place he asked after Sleeping Beauty, until finally he arrived in the kingdom where she lay sleeping. As he walked through the dark forest, a little man appeared. "Where are you going?" said the dwarf. "I am seeking Sleeping Beauty," said the prince. "Do you love her more than life itself?" "I am prepared to forfeit my life to find her," said the prince. "We shall see," said the dwarf. Then out of the shadows stepped one of the most beautiful women the prince had ever seen. "Please stay here with me," said the lady. The prince knelt before her and said, "Lady, I'm at your service, but I cannot stay." "Then turn and meet my father." The prince turned and found himself face to face with a terrible ogre. The prince drew his sword and cut off the ogre's head, and whereupon both the ogre and his daughter vanished into the air. They were just an illusion. They weren't real. The dwarf stood laughing behind him. "That was a test," he said. "Many who were filled with desire followed her. Later she ate them. Many were frightened away. Others were filled with greed. They wished to plunder Sleeping Beauty's castle. Their greed was so great that they even came this far. But I always found out what they wanted." "If you are true," said the dwarf, "then know that the griffin is no worse than you yourself. The hardest way through the swamp is the easiest, and pity will lead you through the thorns. Goodbye." And with that, the dwarf was gone. The prince continued to follow the path. There he is. There's a pretty lady, and behind her is her father, but it was all just pretend. It was a fake. And so we're going to see what the griffin looks like. And there's the griffin. Kind of a flying dragon. Soon he came to a barren, rocky land. In the distance he saw the griffin standing guard. "I'll wait until dark to try to pass by him," thought the prince, but each time the prince tried to go by him, the griffin woke with a mighty roar. "Then I'll try to approach him from the north," thought the prince, and after 7 days of travel he was north of the forest, but the griffin was there as well. He tried to approach from the east and the west, but each time the griffin was waiting. "There's no way to get around the griffin as he sleeps," thought the prince. "I'll approach him while he is awake and battle to the death if necessary." He drew his sword and came closer. To his surprise, with every step he took, the griffin grew smaller and smaller, and by the time they were face to face, the griffin was the size of a large dog. Indeed, thought the prince, the dwarf was right. The griffin is not as he appears. Before him lay the swamp. The prince entered it, walking on whatever land he could find. He saw monsters in the mist and reflections in the water. He stumbled over swords and bits of armor from earlier travelers who were now lost. In the mist, dreaming Dreamlike visions beckoned to him, and a weak heart would have turned to stone, but the prince fixed his mind and heart on Sleeping Beauty to keep from going crazy. Gradually, the prince began to realize that if he turned toward the beautiful visions, they grew harder and more treacherous, but if he turned toward the monsters and walked toward the pools of horror,